They didn't just break his bones, they cracked open a city's ugly secret. The cops thought it was just another routine night of intimidation, another young black kid to rough up and silence. But this time, their fists landed on the wrong body. The boy's name was Marcus Johnson, 17 years old, still straddling the awkward line between boyhood and manhood. He wasn't a troublemaker, though the officers that stopped him outside the corner store painted him as one. He had a smile too wide for his own good, his teachers said, a kind of light that made people either trust him instantly or want to extinguish it. That night, he had only gone out to grab a bottle of soda for his younger sister, promising her he'd be back before the TV show started. He never made it home. When the police car rolled up, Marcus froze. Every warning his father had drilled into him echoed in his mind. Don't move too fast. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. But none of it mattered. The officers didn't ask questions. They saw his skin first, then everything else. By the time neighbors spilled out of their porches, the sound of batons striking bone and the boy's muffled cries had already filled the street. Hours later, Marcus lay unconscious in a hospital bed, his face swollen, ribs cracked, blood seeping beneath the gauze. And by his side, standing like an unmoved statue, was General Samuel Johnson. No one in the police department knew who Samuel was not yet. To them, he was just another black father, another angry face in a waiting room they'd learned to ignore. But Samuel Johnson was no ordinary man. He had spent 3 decades leading men into battle, orchestrating missions most civilians would never hear about, a strategist whose very name carried weight among America's most elite units. He had stood against insurgents in foreign deserts, against terrorists in dark forests, but nothing in his long career cut deeper than seeing his son beaten half to death in his own homeland. The nurses whispered when he walked in, his uniform catching the dim hospital lights, the ribbons on his chest telling stories of valor and sacrifice. Samuel didn't need to shout. His silence spoke volumes. When Marcus finally stirred, his voice was a rasp. Dad, they thought I was someone else. His father's jaw tightened. Not someone else, Samuel thought. They thought you were exactly who you area young black boy. That was enough. Samuel's mind was already working like the general he was. He thought about the chain of command, the false reports that would be filed, the half-truths buried under paperwork. He thought about the officers who'd return home, washing their hands of the blood they'd spilled, certain nothing would come of it. But most of all, he thought about his son's eyes still alive, still defiant, refusing to let this world snuff him out. By morning, the city was buzzing. Videos from bystanders surfaced, shaky but damning, capturing flashes of blue uniforms and the dull thud of violence. Outrage spread across neighborhoods, fueling protests that clogged intersections. Yet the police department doubled down, claiming Marcus had resisted arrest, that force had been necessary. Samuel read their statement in silence, each word like poison. When he arrived at the precinct, he didn't wear anger on his sleeve. He wore his uniform. The front desk officer faltered when he saw him, eyes darting from the polished stars on his shoulders to the steely calm in his gaze. I'm here for the men who assaulted my son, Samuel said evenly. The room went quiet. What no one in that building knew was that Samuel had more than authority, had connections, allies in high places, men and women who trusted him with their lives. Within hours, word had spread beyond the precinct walls, whispers reaching city officials, journalists, even Capitol Hill. For years, Samuel had fought enemies across oceans. Now, the battlefield was here, on cracked city sidewalks and sterile hospital corridors. His son was his mission, his city his terrain, and the enemy wore badges. The officers who beat Marcus tried to bury themselves in lies, claiming shadows where light was clear, resistance where there was none. But Samuel knew how to break through deception. He had done it countless times before in interrogation rooms across the world. And this time, he wasn't just a general. He was a father. The golden light of late afternoon streamed through the hospital blinds, painting Marcus's bruised face in a glow that seemed almost holy. Samuel sat beside him, his large hand engulfing his son's smaller one. He whispered words he hadn't spoken since Marcus was a child afraid of the dark. You're safe now, son. I promise you this won't end here. But promises, Samuel knew, meant nothing without action. And action was what he had always been born for. Under the fluorescent buzz of the hospital corridor, Samuel Johnson's footsteps sounded like a drumbeat of inevitability. The doctors and nurses glanced up as he passed, sensing something in his presence that transcended rank or uniform. It wasn't just authority, it was the quiet, simmering storm of a man whose patience was measured not in hours, but in decades of discipline. Samuel had always known restraint. He had led missions where one wrong glance could cost dozens of lives. But this, watching his son broken by men sworn to protect this, tested the very core of his self-control. Back in Marcus's room, his younger sister Kayla sat clutching her brother's hand, her small frame almost swallowed by the oversized hoodie she wore. At 12 years old, she was old enough to understand what had happened, but still young enough to believe her father could fix anything. She looked up when Samuel re-entered, her eyes red from crying. "Daddy, are they going to say sorry?" she asked. Samuel crouched to meet her gaze. He did not soften his voice with false comfort. "No, baby. They won't say sorry. But they will answer." Kayla swallowed hard, nodding, as though she was already learning the bitter truths of the world too soon. The news cycle was relentless. By evening, every major station had footage of the beating. Talking heads debated whether Marcus had provoked the officers, whether the video was the full story. The chief of police, a stout man with thinning hair, stood behind a podium, insisting the department would conduct an internal review. Samuel watched the press conference from the hospital TV, his face unreadable. He had seen this before, leaders hiding behind procedure, hoping outrage would fade with time. But Samuel's patience had its limits. He dialed a number rarely used, one that connected directly to a Pentagon office. A familiar voice answered. "General Johnson? What's wrong?" "Wrong," Samuel repeated, his voice low. "My son is lying in a hospital bed, beaten by uniformed men in the streets of my own country. That's what's wrong." There was silence on the line. The man on the other end had served under Samuel years ago, and he knew better than to interrupt when the general's tone cut this sharply. "I need resources," Samuel continued. "Not weapons. Not soldiers. Information. Records on those officers, the chain of command, every time they've crossed the line. They've hidden behind badges too long. No more." "I'll see what I can do," came the response, cautious but respectful. "Don't see," Samuel said flatly. "Do." He hung up. His hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of what was to come. Meanwhile, Marcus drifted in and out of restless sleep. His dreams were fractured, flashes of blue lights, the sound of boots pounding pavement, fists raining down. He woke gasping, clutching his chest, only to see his father's silhouette in the golden wash of sunset. I thought they were going to kill me," Marcus whispered. Samuel leaned close, his voice firm but gentle. "They didn't. You're alive. That's your victory. But what about justice?" Marcus's words cracked with both youth and fury. "They get away with it, Dad. Every time. What's the point of living if we're just targets?" Samuel paused, the question slicing deeper than any battlefield wound. He saw not just his son, but generations before him, men and women who had carried the weight of the same question. He tightened his grip on Marcus's hand. "The point is, you will live to see the day they answer for it. And I'll make sure of that." The protests swelled. Streets once quiet now pulsed with chants and handmade signs. Samuel walked among them one evening, not in uniform but in plain clothes, his broad frame moving through the crowd like a silent guardian. Some recognized him and whispered his name. Others simply saw a father standing with them. The air reeked of tear gas from nights before, but the people refused to disperse. They knew the story of Marcus Johnson, and in his pain they saw their own. Inside the precinct, however, the officers held a different line. The two men who had beaten Marcus, officers Daniels and Crowley, sat smugly in a back office, certain their union and their chief would shield them. Daniels, the taller of the two with a sneer carved permanently into his face, chuckled as he watched protest footage on his phone. "All this over one kid. He'll heal. They always do." Crowley smirked. "And if he doesn't, that's one less punk on the street." Their laughter was cut short when the door swung open and Captain Ruiz entered, his expression tight. "Shut your mouths. You don't realize whose kid that was." "What? Some preacher's boy?" Daniel scoffed. Ruiz shook his head. "No. General Samuel Johnson's son. Special Forces commander." The room went silent. Crowley's smirk faltered. Daniels leaned back, dismissive but uneasy. So what? He can't touch us. This isn't the army. But Ruiz's eyes told another story. You've started a war you don't understand. Back at the hospital, Samuel received a flash drive delivered discreetly by a former colleague. Inside were files complaints against Daniels and Crowley, patterns of violence swept under the rug, settlements paid quietly to families too afraid to fight further. Samuel read each document like a soldier studying enemy movements. Every page fueled his resolve. He wasn't just going to fight for Marcus. He was going to expose an entire system. That night, as the city lay under a restless sky, Samuel sat beside his son's bed once more. Marcus stirred, eyes half open. "Dad," he murmured, "you're not going to let this go, are you?" Samuel's voice was steady as stone. "Not this time, son. Not this time." The golden light of dawn crept through the blinds, and with it came the first true stirrings of change. The morning broke with sirens echoing faintly in the distance, as though the city itself refused to rest. General Samuel Johnson sat in the hospital cafeteria, a paper cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. He had been awake all night, mind racing, piecing together his next move. He wasn't just a father anymore, was a commander planning a campaign. Only this battlefield was his own country, and the enemy wore the same flag on their shoulders. The files he had uncovered weren't just damning, they were explosive. Daniels and Crowley weren't isolated offenders. They were repeat predators, protected by layers of bureaucracy. Samuel read accounts of young men stopped without cause, mothers screaming in the night as their sons were dragged away, quiet settlements paid out to bury the noise. The pattern was undeniable. It wasn't two rogue cops. It was a culture rotting from the inside. Samuel knew he had to strike carefully. Too rash, and he would be dismissed as an angry father blinded by grief. Too slow, and the city's fury would burn out, leaving his sons suffering just another forgotten headline. He needed precision, timing, and above all, visibility. He started with allies. That morning, he met with Reverend Carter, a local pastor whose church had long been a sanctuary for the oppressed. The Reverend, an aging man with silver hair and eyes still sharp with conviction, shook Samuel's hand firmly. "I heard about Marcus," he said. "Your boy's name is on every tongue in this city. People are ready to march. They just need someone to lead." Samuel exhaled. "I don't want a mob. I want justice." "Justice," the Reverend replied, "is rarely given. It's taken. And if the people see you, if they see the general standing for his son, they'll know it's possible." Later that afternoon, Samuel stood on the church steps, the sun striking his uniform until it gleamed. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but he didn't raise his voice until the crowd quieted on its own. "My son," he began, the words heavy but steady, "was beaten in the streets not because he resisted, not because he posed a threat, but because of the color of his skin. They left him in a hospital bed fighting for his life. But my son is not alone. Every black parent fears this night after night. Every child of color grows up with a target on their back." "Enough," the crowd roared. "This is not about vengeance," Samuel continued. "This is about accountability. The officers who did this must answer, not tomorrow, not next year, but now. And every leader who covered for them must answer too. I have fought wars abroad, but today I stand to fight a war at home. And I will not stop until my son, and every child, can walk our streets without fear." His words spread faster than fire. By evening, national networks carried clips of his speech. Hashtags with Marcus's name trended across platforms. What had been a local scandal was now a national reckoning. But inside the precinct, panic brewed. Daniels and Crowley sat through a tense meeting with the police union lawyer, their arrogance cracking under pressure. "The general's making this political," Daniels muttered. "It already is political," the lawyer snapped. "And you two have become liabilities. Do you understand? If the department needs scapegoats, they'll start with you." Crowley slammed his fist on the table. "We followed protocol." "Protocol doesn't matter when the whole country is watching," the lawyer shot back. "Do yourselves a favor and keep your mouth shut. The less you say, the better." Yet Samuel wasn't content with speeches alone. He used his network, calling in favors from journalists, civil rights attorneys, even former military comrades who now held political office. Soon, a federal investigation was announced. The chief of police tried to downplay it, but the tide had shifted. Samuel had forced the battle onto ground where the truth couldn't be hidden. Meanwhile, Marcus was healing slowly. His body remained weak, but his spirit burned with questions. "Dad," he asked one night, his voice hoarse, "why do you think they hate us so much?" Samuel hesitated, searching for words a boy could carry. "Hate is taught, son, passed down like a sickness. They fear what they don't control. But your lifey wear proof they don't get to control everything." Marcus nodded, his eyes wet. "Then I want to fight too. Not with fists. With truth. With telling what happened." Samuel smiled faintly. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." The protests swelled again, this time with Marcus's face on posters, his story shouted in chants. The hospital became a gathering place, flowers and cards lining the walls, strangers holding vigils. Samuel walked among them, humbled. This wasn't just his fight, Anna Marie, it belonged to all of them. But power never yields easily. Late one night, as Samuel drove home to shower and change, a black SUV followed him for several miles. At a red light, it pulled alongside, windows tinted. Samuel's instincts screamed. He reached into the glove box, not for a weapon, but for the phone already recording. When the SUV sped off, tires screeching, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He knew intimidation when he saw it. And he knew it meant he was winning. The next day, Samuel received a message from a journalist ally, a leaked internal memo from the precinct, showing deliberate efforts to bury complaints against Daniels and Crowley. It was proof not just of individual brutality, but of systemic cover-up. Samuel studied the document, each line another nail in the coffin of their defense. That evening, standing outside the hospital, he addressed the crowd once more. They tried to hide it. They tried to bury the truth. But we have the evidence now. And when truth comes into the light, there is no going back. My son will not suffer in vain. This city will change, or it will fall under the weight of its own lies. The golden sunset bathed the scene, casting Samuel's silhouette in fierce light. Marcus watched from his window, pride and pain etched across his bruised face. For the first time, he believed his father's promise. This would not end here. The courthouse steps looked like a battlefield. Not with blood, not with smoke, but with people, hundreds of them, faces turned upward, voices raised, hands gripping signs that bore Marcus's name. General Samuel Johnson stood tall among them, his uniform pressed sharp, his medals gleaming beneath the harsh noon sun. He wasn't there as a soldier. He was there as a father, as a citizen, as a man who refused to bow to injustice. Inside, the trial of officers Daniels and Crowley had dragged on for weeks. The defense had tried every tactic, blaming Marcus, questioning the video, painting themselves as victims of a dangerous street. But the evidence Samuel had unearthed was irrefutable. Complaints stacked on complaints, cover-ups written in bureaucratic ink, settlements paid to silence grieving families. And then there was Marcus himself, his quiet testimony delivered in a trembling but resolute voice that silenced the courtroom. "They hit me," Marcus had said, each word deliberate. "Not because I did anything wrong, but because they could, because I look like this." He had lifted his chin, letting the room see the scars that hadn't yet faded. "But I lived, and I'm here. That's proof they don't get to win." Samuel had felt pride swell in his chest that day, a pride fiercer than any medal he'd ever earned. Now, as the jury deliberated, the city held its breath. Samuel stood outside with the crowd, Kayla clutching his hand, Marcus leaning on his crutches beside him. The golden autumn sunlight spilled across the courthouse facade, painting everything in a glow that felt almost divine. Then the doors opened. The clerk appeared, pale and tense. "The jury has reached a verdict." Inside, the room buzzed with tension. Samuel and his children sat in the front row, eyes locked on the bench. Daniels and Crowley shifted in their seats, sweat gleaming on their brows. The judge called for order. On the charge of aggravated assault, the clerk read, "We find the defendants guilty." The room erupted, gasps, cries, a swell of emotion like a dam breaking. Samuel closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he'd been holding for months. Marcus's hand found his father's, gripping tight. "Guilty." The word echoed like a bell through the city streets. Outside, when the verdict was announced, the crowd roared with relief, with vindication, with something that felt like hope. Strangers embraced. Tears streamed down faces lined with years of waiting for a moment like this. Daniels and Crowley were led away in handcuffs, their arrogance stripped. For the first time, they looked small. And Samuel, standing tall, felt no triumph in their downfall, only justice long overdue. In the days that followed, the ripples spread. The police chief resigned under pressure. Federal oversight descended on the department. Reforms were announced: training, accountability boards, body cameras that could no longer be switched off at will. For once, change wasn't just promised. It began to take root. But Samuel knew victory was never final. He reminded Marcus and Kayla often, "This is one battle. The war for justice is bigger than us." Still, he allowed himself moments of peace. Watching Marcus laugh with his sister again, seeing the boy's color return, the bruises fade, the light in his eyes grow strong. One evening, months later, Samuel and Marcus sat on the porch of their home. The sun was setting, painting the world in golden light. Marcus leaned back, his crutches now abandoned in the corner. "Dad," he said softly, "when they were hitting me, I thought it was the end. But now I feel like it was a beginning." Samuel turned to his son, studying the young man who had endured so much and still stood. "That's because it is. Your voice, your story, it's stronger than their hate. You survived, Marcus, and surviving is the loudest defiance there is." The boy smiled faintly, his gaze on the horizon. "Maybe someday, kids like me won't have to survive. They'll just live." Samuel reached over, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "That's the world we're fighting for. And I swear to you, we'll get there." The night grew quiet. In the distance, the city pulsed with life, restless and imperfect, but moving forward. Samuel sat with his children, the golden light fading into dusk, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Not as a general, not as a soldier, but as a father who had kept his promise. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.